At 10:15 a.m., in an execution chamber in Oklahoma, a man lay strapped to a gurney, calm enough to speak clearly, calm enough to say his conscience was completely clear. Scott Eizember said he was at peace. He said he loved his children. And then the drugs began to flow. This wasn't a chaotic ending. There was no shouting, no final outburst. Just a quiet room, a few witnesses behind glass, and a story that had been dragging itself toward this moment for more than 20 years. Because what ended here didn't start with rage. It didn't start with a plan to kill an elderly couple. And it didn't even start with them at all. Welcome to Death Row Diaries. Scott Eizember wasn't supposed to be in the Cantrell's house that night. According to prosecutors, he broke in for one reason only: to wait, to watch, to lie in wait for his ex-girlfriend who lived across the street. That was it. A quiet Oklahoma neighborhood, a house that wasn't even the target, and two people who had no idea their ordinary evening was about to become the center of a death row case that would last decades. A.J. Cantrell was 76 years old. His wife, Patsy, was 70. They left their home that evening and came back early, something that should have been meaningless. It wasn't. When they walked through the door, they interrupted something that was already unstable, and within minutes the situation spiraled into violence. A shotgun inside the house, a sudden struggle. Patsy Cantrell was shot and killed. What happened next depends on who you believe. Prosecutors said Scott Eizember then turned on A.J. Cantrell, beating him to death with the shotgun itself. Eizember later claimed there was a struggle, that things happened fast, that not everything was intentional. But the result didn't change. Two people were dead, and neither of them was the person he had come for. Afterward, he didn't stop. He walked across the street. Inside that second home was his ex-girlfriend, her teenage son, and her mother. The son was shot in the back. He survived. The mother was beaten. She survived too. And then Scott Eizember vanished. What followed wasn't a short search. It wasn't a quick arrest. It was a 37-day manhunt. Police believed he was hiding in wooded areas near Depew and Bristow, moving at night, staying out of sight. Residents were scared. Officers warned he was armed and dangerous. And here's the part that stuck with investigators later. They didn't believe he was done. Eventually, he slipped out of Oklahoma entirely. He stole a car, crossed into Arkansas, and then took things even further. A physician and his wife were kidnapped at gunpoint. For hours, they were forced to drive with him, not knowing if they'd survive the trip. No dramatic rescue, no police stop, just a moment where the victim fought back. Inside that van, the physician pulled out a pistol he had stashed and shot Scott Eizember multiple times. That's how it ended. Not with police, not with a chase, with a hostage refusing to stay a hostage. Eizember was arrested near Lufkin, Texas. You might think that's where the story stops. It wasn't. Federal court came first. Kidnapping, carjacking, firearms charges. He was sentenced to 25 years in federal prison, but Oklahoma was waiting. In 2005, Scott Eizember was convicted for the murders of A.J. and Patsy Cantrell. First-degree murder for A.J., second-degree murder for Patsy. One death sentence, one sentence of 150 years. On death row, the years stacked up. Eizember admitted guilt, but never fully accepted the state's version of events. He expressed remorse. He said he belonged in prison. But his attorneys argued something else, that the killings were unplanned, that his life still had value, that executing him 2 decades later wasn't justice, it was revenge. At his clemency hearing, the vote was close. 3-2. Clemency denied. The Cantrell family had waited nearly 20 years. Some of them said that wait was too long. Others said it didn't matter how long it took, only that it happened. As the execution date approached, something unexpected nearly stopped everything. Scott Eizember wanted his spiritual advisor inside the death chamber. The state initially said no. The reason? The pastor was an anti-death penalty activist with a history of arrests during protests. Hours before the execution, a lawsuit was filed, and suddenly the state reversed course. The concern wasn't ideology, it was delay. No one wanted the execution halted at the last second, so the pastor was allowed in, under strict rules, monitored closely, watched the entire time. On the morning of the execution, Scott Eizember spoke with him quietly. Witnesses later said the conversation continued even as the drugs began. When the lethal injection started, Eizember appeared calm. He lifted his head once and mouthed, "I love you," toward his daughter and attorneys watching through the glass. His breathing slowed, then became labored. At 10:07 a.m., he was unconscious. At 10:10, he appeared to stop breathing. At 10:15 a.m., Scott James Eizember was pronounced dead. Afterward, family members of the Cantrells spoke. Some said it brought closure. Some said no amount of time could undo what happened. One relative called it justice, but also urged Oklahoma to confront domestic violence earlier, before it escalates, before it spreads. Because this story didn't begin with two elderly victims. It began much earlier, and it ended exactly where it was always heading. A random, avoidable crime, a manhunt that crossed state lines, and a death row sentence that took 20 years to carry out. Justice, according to the state, was served, but for everyone involved, the cost was paid long before the gurney was ever rolled into that room. And that's where this story finally stops.